And a happy St. Patrick's Day to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Lots to go over in terms of the weather that we do have in the short term, but as we get into the long term, it's really just kind of the name of the game is going to be just the numbers that we are going to be treated to as we head into the weekend ahead. Not really seeing any signs of a substantial rainmaker that will arrive within the next 7 days. And I think we do deserve a break given what the last 5 to 6 days have looked like here in Central Georgia. So first things first, your weather impact alert does continue, not necessarily in place for your Tuesday afternoon or your Tuesday evening, but it is going to be present as we go into the overnight and morning hours into Wednesday. For once again, sub-freezing temperatures that are settling in behind our frontal boundary that is ushering in that cooler air mass. So before we go into more specifics with that, let's go ahead and talk about your March rainfall. We've had 2 severe weather systems come through over the course of the last 5 to 6 days, but they haven't necessarily correlated to a whole lot of rainfall. Back on the 12th, as we went into the late portion of last week, only about a ½ inch of rainfall, a little bit above that. And then as of yesterday, we only in fact recorded 0.34 inches of rainfall. So definitely not a substantial rainmaker whatsoever. Also kind of emphasizing the fact that it's really just the leading edge with these boundaries. That's where the heaviest rainfall is going to be. That's where the gusty winds are. And that's, of course, where your lightning, possible hail, and indications of rotation have been within. After that leading edge passes through, it's really just that residual rainfall that creates a bit of a messy atmosphere for maybe about an hour or two after the passage of the actual frontal boundary. But for the month of March so far, we are above 1.5 inches of rainfall, 1.65 inches to be exact. But we still need to get really close to around 5 inches to get to what we are typically on average for the month of March. Doesn't look like that record is once again going to be inside of 12.5 inches of some rainfall. So over a foot of rainfall that we got back in March of 1944, excuse me. But for the year of 2026, our year departure of rain, it's actually improved just a little bit. As of late last week that we were talking about this, it was sitting around 3.7 inches below average, and now we're to around 3.2 inches below average. Not too much of an improvement, hey, but we'll take any little small win when it does come to this rainfall category because once again, continuing to be the 3rd consecutive month with a red box, and that's coming after our fair share of months that did have red boxes towards the back half of 2025, which we did end the year on a very, very wet note. So as of March 16th, we are hovering right there just above 3 inches below where we should be, 3 consecutive red boxes, but February and March, we haven't been as bad below average as we were for the month of January, but we still have a good amount, probably about 13 to 14 days of the month of March, so there is still time to maybe put a pretty significant dent down in that red box category. So freeze warning for Tuesday and Wednesday mornings. The freeze warning has finally expired for your Tuesday morning as here at 11 o'clock, it is already 1 hour past when that freeze warning did expire at the 10 a.m. hour. Warmer days are ahead, I promise you. It obviously is very, very cold for your St. Patrick's Day, and it's going to continue to be that way throughout the rest of the afternoon, but we are going to have some spring-like afternoons that are ahead on your 7-day forecast. Mostly dry as we head into the weekend. That's always a pleasant sight to see, even if we aren't going to necessarily have some nice feeling temperatures. It is looking to be a mostly dry weekend, but this weekend is going to be the best of both worlds. It is going to be full of some warmer temperatures, and it is going to be full of some mostly dry conditions. So lots and lots of good news towards the back half of your 7-day forecast. A walk around the quad shows at least some clearer skies than what we have been getting a glimpse of all morning long. We've had some upper level cloud cover, which we still get some faint indications of in areas like the Georgia National Fairgrounds, maybe here in Warner Robins, as we see a couple of those high little white streaks. Most cloud cover that we can find is actually looking up to the north and the northeast here in downtown Macon, but still a forecast dominated by plenty of blue sky and sunshine. It's not necessarily correlating on the temperature side of things, however. All these numbers are above freezing now, but upper 30s and the low 40s are what we're seeing all across your temperature map. This is pretty reminiscent of many afternoons that we did have as we were in the winter season here in the United States. I guess actually, that actually turns my attention to doing something really quick here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and pop up some temperatures all across the United States, which we typically like to do on the stream, but I've turned a lot of graphics off, obviously, just because we've had our severe weather risk as of recently, and that's kind of been the main topic of discussion. So you saw those numbers in central Georgia, somewhere in the low 40s or the upper 30s. How about this? We have some 30s that are still lingering over to the west of us. Upper 20s in Nashville, 22 in Lexington, and then still sitting in the teens up in St. Louis and in Indianapolis, even all the way back over into Texas. It is a very cold environment, scattered about the 40s, 52 down in Laredo, even a 48 all the way down in Orlando, Florida, giving you an idea that this was a very strong frontal boundary that did come through. And all of this colder air is really caused by a big significant dip in the jet stream. So that's why we are seeing those shades of even some purple and getting up into some pink as you go directly to the north. That's where the jet stream has sunk down just a little bit, and we are continuing to watch that air mass go well down into the state of Florida. Of course, southern Florida is still holding on to probably the most green that we can see, other than over to the east of the Rocky Mountains as of right now. It actually appears, I think the temperature over in Denver might be 53 degrees right now. What if I told you that was the warmest temperature that I actually spot on this graphic right now? That is pretty crazy to say that Denver is the warmest over here in the eastern portion of the United States. Here in the southeast, good mix of 30s and 40s. Don't think I see anyone holding on to the 20s, but Huntsville, still rather chilly. 32 degrees in many of these areas of the northern half of Alabama, and getting up into here where you can kind of see the difference between the light blue and a darker blue shade. These areas had their fair share of wintry weather. Yes, you did hear that correctly as we went into the yesterday afternoon. That didn't come to fruition in central Georgia. Obviously, we were showing you that on the model runs, but we were telling you don't plan on seeing anything besides a flurry or two. And even at that, they weren't going to have anything in the way of impacts with, say, travel or maybe freezing over on the surface. And we didn't really see too many impacts up in the northern portion of the state of Georgia, but it was quite the sight to see. Severe storms in the morning, transitioning into a line of some wintry weather as we went into the afternoon. Just a crazy system that made its way through the United States. There's another look at your temperature map here, upper 30s and low 40s like we were saying. But the big thing this morning and the big story has been what it actually feels like outside. So your winds and your wind gust graphic right here is honestly looking like a mix of some colors that I normally don't see. But nonetheless, we're still keeping a pretty widespread breeze coming out of the northwest. And we are seeing those winds somewhere around maybe 8 to maybe 9 or even as high as 12 to 15 miles per hour. Once again, that little number in white going to be your sustained winds. That's what the winds are consistently blowing at. But those yellow numbers over to the right, like you see a 17 up here in Milledgeville and a 16 down in Butler, those are going to be your occasional wind gusts. And that's just where the winds do blow a little bit faster in nature on occasion, not consistently, but that's what you're really going to notice as we go throughout the afternoon. And the gustier those winds get, the more and more it decreases what it actually feels like outside. Still feels below freezing temperature in Sparta all the way over to Thomaston. Our fair share of some 32s, some 33s on this graphic. But as we go farther down to the south, you can spot a good mix of the mid and the upper 30s in areas to the east and the southeast in central Georgia. Satellite and radar picture. Here's a look at your satellite where we do spot a few of those higher level clouds still remaining in the forecast, but that is not going to be very long lasting whatsoever. And you can see that most of the state of Georgia is going to be dry for the most part. We might notice something in the way of a little bit of light precipitation up to the north. I don't think I'm necessarily seeing any indications of that, but maybe a little bit hopeful that we will see something. We're not going to see much in the way of rain over the course of the next couple of days. So go ahead and get used to this number here on your departure, and that number is going to definitely go farther and farther down into the negative category over the course of the next couple of days. 68 for a high temperature yesterday. Would you believe it if I also told you that 68 degrees was the temperature that we hit yesterday early morning? In the typical time that we actually see our morning low values, we saw our highest temperature for yesterday. So it doesn't really paint the full picture because yesterday around 3, 4, 5 o'clock, we were sitting somewhere in the upper 40s for those afternoon high temperatures, and then we got down to 37 degrees. That was just before the midnight hour, before we transitioned into Tuesday. That's when we hit our lowest temperature yesterday. So yes, you do see the low and the high, but that wasn't hit at the typical time that we normally do see. It was actually kind of a flip-flop day, if you will, where the high temperature was hit in the morning, and then we hit the low temperature as we went into the nighttime hours a little bit before. We would typically see it as we go into the early morning time frame. But even at that, 68 degrees was still below average of 71, and 37 degrees obviously below average of 45 degrees, but I imagine our lows this morning, they got down well below that, probably closer to around the 30-degree mark. Maybe even a 29 popped up, but we'll have to see that later this afternoon. 87 was the record. We were flirting with these record high temperatures as of this time last week. Not the case anymore. 1955 is when we hit that record high. 1916, record low of 26. Going to be surprised to see how close we get to that number as we get our official recordings in as of later on this afternoon. But that rainmaker was not very substantial, only just over about a quarter of an inch of rain. Your departure of rain, we touched on that already. Been a very dry start to 2026. Sunrise time, 7:43, and sunset time, also 7:43, indicating that yesterday was the first time that we got back to having 12 hours of daylight. Well, congratulations. You have made it to not only St. Patrick's Day, but the first day so far in the calendar year that we are going to see more time of daylight as opposed to nighttime. So daylight hours are going to be just over 12 hours, 12 hours, 1 minute and 53 seconds to be exact. And they will continue to get longer and longer as we go into the summer and really all the way until we get sometime deep into the fall when we have that next time change and we start to see those really, really early sunsets like we did have just a couple of months ago, but we are way away from that. So Tuesday, March 17th, marking the first time that we have more daylight hours as opposed to some nighttime hours. And you can see that was kind of the second most important date that I did have on this graphic. Now what you need to be on the lookout for is April 9th. So still a couple weeks away, a couple days after Easter Sunday, as a matter of fact. That's going to be the first time that the sunset returns to the 8 p.m. hour during daylight saving time. And you can see how many hours of daylight we have as we go into the month of April. How about that? Approaching 13 hours of some daylight, 12 hours and 48 minutes of daylight. It is going to be very nice to see more and more evening sunlight, if you will. It hasn't been the best for myself, I can attest personally, especially having to hit the hay really early to get into work early to cover some of these severe weather events. But hey, I might just have to invest in some blackout curtains or maybe just throw a pillow or a face mask over my eyes because that light has definitely made it a little bit difficult to fall asleep. But I do normally try to tire myself out in the afternoons in order to make sure that we do fall asleep. So a frosty morning for the St. Patrick's Day Tuesday, but as we head into the afternoon, my main headline was wear some green colored layers because you are going to need to keep the layers on this afternoon, even despite the mostly sunny skies. 51 degrees for a high temperature, which is 20 degrees below your average high of 71. And not only that, you're pairing up 51 degrees with northwesterly winds, 5 to 10 miles per hour, and that occasional gust that could get up to 20 miles per hour, like what we were seeing on the current winds and wind gust map. So those winds are going to influence what it feels like outside with high temperatures that are just crawling above the 50s. Those winds are going to continue to make them feel a little bit cooler, say somewhere down into the 40s throughout today. Hence why I said continue to wear those green colored layers to make sure, number one, you are staying warm, but also number two, don't want anyone getting pinched throughout the rest of today. So here's a look at your hour by hour temperatures where this graphic is peaking around 51 degrees. And this is a bit of a rare occasion where I actually do agree with this graphic. Typically after we have the passage of a frontal boundary, we're hovering a lot closer to what the models are saying. So I think there's pretty good consistency around 51 being that high temperature. Later on this afternoon, once again between 4, 5, and 6 o'clock. Then after that, we get closer and closer to sunset, and we'll start to see the numbers drop down just a touch. But get used to most of the beginning of the afternoon being scattered somewhere in the 40s. So right now, 42 degrees, and that might be a little bit behind what we are seeing as of right now. That temperature map was showing some upper 30s and some low 40s, but Macon is also farther to the north. So I think our temperature up in Macon isn't going to be fully reminiscent of the rest of central Georgia. That cooler air mass filtering in from the north and the northwest, which you can see indicated by those northwesterly winds. I do believe Macon's going to be a little bit cooler than, say, areas like Dublin, down to Cochran, down to Eastman, or maybe down to McRae. If you are farther down to the south and the southeast, not feeling as much of that colder air mass that has settled up directly to the northwest of us. So here's a look at your surface map. Your frontal boundary that came through yesterday, it has made its way through the whole entire peninsula of Florida, as a matter of fact. We do see a couple of light showers off the Atlantic coast of areas like Miami, getting down to West Palm Beach, creeping over into the Bahamas. We see a couple of snow showers still up here in the Appalachian Mountains, states like West Virginia, Kentucky, getting down into Western Virginia and northeastern Tennessee. But overall, high pressure has settled in across this portion of the country. We actually see some more snow showers at the very top of your screen, back up in the Dakotas and up into Minnesota. But we don't have any big scale weather systems that are way out to the west that are looking like they'll make their way over to the east over the next couple of days. High pressure is going to mean a fairly quiet forecast that we have for the next couple of days. Here's a look at the next couple of hours as we head into this afternoon. The breeze continues to persist. Then we go into tomorrow morning, where it does look like some cloud cover tries to creep in during the early morning hours, and this may slow a little bit of that cool down as we go into that window, 5, 6 to 7 a.m. Hopefully this cloud cover will help prevent a lot of these numbers from getting well below 32 degrees like we did see as of this morning, but I'm not too confident that it will have much of an influence. I think it's just going to create a bit of a gloomy atmosphere to walk outside to for at least around 7 to 8, maybe even 9 to 10 a.m., but eventually that cloud cover does decrease as we head into the second half of your Wednesday. But I wouldn't be surprised to walk out your fair share of some gray skies tomorrow morning before you start to see a good mix of some clouds and some sun through the second half of your Wednesday. Here's a look at Thursday morning. Mostly clear skies. The breeze has subsided. We see passing clouds throughout the afternoon. And then we go into the evening hours, still not seeing anything that looks really impressive in the form of rain chances. And number two, if we're talking about when it's going to be cloudy and when it's going to be sunny, future view is a very, very quiet story. So let's talk about some of the other specific values, something that you may be noticing today that is probably not going to be present as we go into tomorrow. So a steady breeze, even some occasional gusts that get up to around 20 to 25 miles per hour. I wouldn't put too much stock in 25 mile per hour gusts, but I think it's mainly going to be a light and a pretty steady breeze that will occasionally have some gusts that try to get close to 20 miles per hour throughout today. The breeze does subside a good bit as we walk out the door tomorrow, but some areas that do have a little bit of some winds are going to feel just a tad bit cooler on the temperature side of things. When they get kind of into the 40s and below, that's where the winds are going to have an influence on what the feels like temperature is sitting at. And then we go all the way through your Wednesday and not even really seeing anything in the way of gusts all the way up to 10 miles per hour. Looks like a lot of those blue and yellow colors do go away. So the weather impact alert for the rest of your Tuesday is gone. Now we are going to settle into that one last weather impact alert for the morning hours on Wednesday, because once again, we are forecasting some sub-freezing temperatures as you walk out the door. And Wednesday afternoon, there's also not really going to be much relief. There's a little bit of a reason for that. That's because we have a slight, and when I mean slight, I mean a very slight wedge setup. That just means that the winds are going to start to shift, come in from the northeast, and that's going to try to usher in a cooler air mass kind of parallel to the Appalachian Mountains, so northeast Georgia, and then once you get over into areas of upstate South Carolina, areas to the east of the Appalachians and North Carolina, they're going to hold on to a cooler air mass, and a little bit of that might try to creep into central Georgia, but overall not going to be a very profound wedge that we typically see can create about a temperature difference of maybe 20 to 30 degrees from north central Georgia down to the south. I would just plan on tomorrow afternoon feeling a little bit better than your St. Patrick's Day afternoon. However, it is still going to be well below average and still definitely going to be a chilly one. Then going into Thursday morning, yes, you don't see the red box highlighting the weather impact alert. That's not to take away from the fact it is still going to be cold as you walk outside on Thursday morning, so make sure you're continuing to keep that layering quite handy. But finally, Thursday afternoon, I think that's going to be the first opportunity that you have to at least shed some of that layering with a high temperature in the upper 60s, which is just a few degrees below average of 71 degrees this time of year. So we once again have another cold weather alert as we go into tomorrow morning, and this is a big reason for that weather impact alert continuing on. Freeze warning for, once again, all of central Georgia. This is Washington County, Twiggs, Houston, Peach, over to Taylor, Jasper, Dodge County, Montgomery County, all counties here in central Georgia under another freeze warning from 11 p.m. tonight all the way until 10 a.m. tomorrow. And this says the highlighted potential for those temperatures below freezing, and also a couple of spots that could dip down into the 20s as you wake up tomorrow. This is one reason for our weather impact alert number 1, but the freeze warning criteria, we don't typically see these issued on, say, a winter overnight time frame. And that is going to be solely because we are used to dipping below 32 degrees once we get into the winter time frame, and that is not going to be the growing season here in central Georgia. You remember how warm we have been lately? We've had temperatures in the 80s. If not in the 80s, they have been in the upper half of the 70s, and that has created a bit of an early start to your growing season. A lot of farmers have probably gotten out and about, started planting some of their crops, and obviously, many of you have probably gone to Lowe's and maybe started up your backyard garden, some of those vegetable plants, or maybe just some potted flowers. Well, once you get the numbers to dip back below freezing temperature, that can be harmful for a lot of those plants. So make sure that you are continuing to tarp, cover, insulate, do whatever you need to do for those crops to maybe shield them from a little bit of those outside elements, but also just bring those potted plants inside. And then, of course, we give you the normal advice that we give you kind of just with each and every time that we dip below freezing temperature. Protect the 4 Ps, plants being one of them, pets, people, and getting into pipes. So the 4 Ps right there, I don't think pipes are going to really be too much of a concern because there's only going to be a very small window that you're going to be below freezing temperature. However, people and pets, you need to make sure that you are continuing to layer up as you walk out the door. This is the coldest that we have been in a while, and weather is always relative to what you have been feeling, and we have not been feeling many mornings like what we have felt as of today. So you will want to continue to bundle up and shield yourself from those outdoor cold temperatures, but make sure that you're just bringing your pets inside as well for the next night or two, because if it's too cold for yourself outside, it is going to be too cold for your furry friends. I do promise that. So how about your allergy monitor? This is something we haven't really talked about as of lately, because we've had our fair share of rainmakers come through and wash away a lot of that pollen. Now that we're going to hit an extended stretch of some dry weather, I will say the tree pollen levels are going to be high throughout your St. Patrick's Day afternoon, not very high, but they will get back to very high levels as we go into the 18th and the 19th on Wednesday and Thursday, so tomorrow and all the way into Thursday. Grass pollen is actually going to be at moderate levels for the next 2 days, and that's actually going to get an uptick into the high levels as we go into the end of the work week. So tree and grass pollen are going to be the main drivers of the sniffles and the sneezes over the course of the next couple of days. Ragweed has still been at virtually 0 levels. We haven't really seen ragweed have much of an impact in terms of some of the sniffling and sneezing. And then getting into mold levels, I would say they're around moderate throughout today because we still just went through a rain event. Typically, once you have the post-passage of a rain system kind of come through, mold levels are a little bit higher, but they are going to remain at moderate levels. I don't think they're going to be as big of a driver to maybe irritating your throat and creating scratchy throat conditions and maybe obviously creating a little bit of those watery eyes and a bit of a runny nose as well. But just make sure that you're continuing to take your Allegra, your Claritin, not only throughout the rest of this week, but basically going through the next entire month, maybe even 2 months ahead, because this is getting into spring season. And speaking of spring season, we are only a couple days away from it. That's what we have indicated by the flower icon right here on Friday. That is going to indicate the first start of the spring season. That's astronomical spring. You may have heard us talking at the beginning of March that we kicked off meteorological spring, and that's just typically kind of a more well-rounded date for when most areas in the United States do hit kind of that warming time frame. And we saw that for the first part of March, but this cold snap has obviously reminded us that, hey, we still can get some pretty significant cold fronts even well into the month of March. And you can see the leprechaun, he's continuing to dance on top of that 51 because he is trying to stay warm, like many of you will be trying to do here in central Georgia later today. 55 for a high temperature on Wednesday, not much improvement, but then we see a pretty drastic uptick. 67 degrees for a high temperature on Thursday. That is going to be pretty close to average, and then after that we increase another 10 degrees in between Thursday and Friday. 77 degrees for a high temperature. Back above average, some beautiful weather as we go into Friday afternoon, because I'll go ahead and give you a bit of a spoiler alert. We're not talking about rain chances throughout your Friday afternoon. So very appropriate for the first day of spring, but also very opportunely timed because Friday going to be the first day of the Cherry Blossom Festival here in Macon, and it only gets better as we go into Saturday with a high temperature of 81. So remember, we were talking about today's high temperature, 20 degrees below average. In the next 5 days, we are going to pop up 10 degrees above average. That is going to be a 30-degree swing in between your high temperature today and for the second day of the weekend. And that is definitely emphasizing the just drastic weather change that we've had here in central Georgia and that we can have in the springtime months. Really, the in-between period, right in between winter, right in between the start of spring, and that's exactly where we are sitting. So Mother Nature really going to remind us that it is still officially winter the next couple of days, but then as we get into Friday morning, 42 for a morning low, still on the chilly side of things as you wake up and walk out the door on Friday. But as you go into the afternoon, you are definitely going to be able to shed those layers. And then 50 degrees for a morning low on Saturday. I think that's going to be the first pleasant feeling morning that we do have in the forecast. But until we get there, we have our fair share of some chilly weather that is going to welcome you out the door for the morning commute. Now let's go into the long-range models where, once again, I mentioned no rain chances throughout Friday. You'll see a couple of those light green specks popping up according to the GFS. I don't think we have at least 10% chance of rain until we get sometime into Saturday, maybe right there around the midday hour. But nothing looks widespread and nothing is going to be worth canceling outdoor plans over. I really want you to get outside and enjoy this beautiful weather this weekend. Of course, make sure that you're continuing to take that allergy medicine like I was referring to, because we are very likely going to see the pollen out in full force with the warmer temperatures that are going to be paired up with some dry weather over the course of Friday, Saturday into Sunday. Couldn't write up a better forecast for the opening weekend of cherry blossom and really couldn't write up a better forecast for the first official couple days of spring. Now, as we go into Monday, there might be some form of a semi-organized weather system. I'm not seeing anything that looks terribly impressive in the form of rain chances. But remember, we were talking about yesterday's frontal boundary a couple days out ahead of time, and those long-range models did not look impressive whatsoever. So we will continue to keep a close eye on what happens next Monday necessarily. It doesn't look like this frontal boundary is as well defined as what we did have over the course of yesterday, but we will continue to keep you updated on when that next widespread rain chance does arrive and if we have any implications or any indications that there could be something in the way of some more severe weather, but I'm just not seeing that in the cards right now. It does look like as we get warmer and then as we go into the beginning of next week, I imagine some moisture is going to return to the forecast. So don't be surprised if we have some pop-up shower chances throughout the heat of the day, both Monday and Tuesday. But we'll continue to see if we can maybe see some form of organization associated with that next weather maker as we go into next Monday. So your weather impact alert, once again, going to be for overnight tonight into the morning hours tomorrow. It is going to go until the 10 a.m. hour when that freeze warning does expire and when the temperatures finally crawl above that 32-degree number. Not to take away from the fact Thursday morning is going to be pretty cold and the numbers are going to flirt with freezing temperature, but we're not looking at them to have the impacts necessarily as dipping below freezing temperature would have to those pets and, of course, those plants. That's the main concern given how warm we have been lately. So once again, that will be the impact, and then after that, we will get rid of all that weather impact stuff that you have been seeing over the course of your stingers and maybe seeing that word alert. Obviously, you might have seen it this morning, and I made sure to try to clarify it about each and every weather hit. The weather impact alert was not for anything in the way of severe weather. I know everyone's sensitivity is pretty high, especially given the fact of what we've had happen over the course of the last week. This weather impact alert, when you see it tomorrow or if you see it over the course of the rest of today, it's just going to be for those below freezing temperatures, having some implications for those pets and those plants. And of course yourself, make sure that you are bundling up on your way out to work and your way out to the bus stop later on tomorrow morning. And then Thursday morning, still going to be cold, but I think Thursday afternoon, finally, the first chance that we have to at least shed some of those layers. And then we are welcoming in spring in full force, 77, 81, and 83 for those high temperatures over the course of your Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. 10% chance of rain on Saturday. We very well might even get rid of that by the time we get closer. And then as we go into Monday, I put a slightly more impressive chance of rain, but still not looking overly impressive and not looking like necessarily a washout whatsoever. So a lot of you also may be curious about the storms that did come through yesterday morning. We did have some reported damage in Bibb County. We have some damage reports in Upson County. The National Weather Service was very, very busy yesterday with those storms in the morning, but also forecasting that winter weather we were talking about in northern Georgia. So they just had the chance to send out a survey team as of this morning, this Tuesday morning, and they did assess the damage in Macon Bibb, are going to make their way over to Upson County, and then they have one more warning that they did have to check out with some damage up in DeKalb County. So they're going to assess all the damage with those tornado-warned storms that they got reported, and if we hear anything about another possible confirmed tornado, you will be the first to know, and we will let you know when we can. But our tally is up to 4 as of late last week. We'll see if we have any more added to that tally over the course of what we saw on Monday morning. So that's going to do it for your extended forecast. A couple of cold days to get through, and then I promise you it's going to be a beautiful looking weekend forecast that you will be rewarded for. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow at 11 a.m.